Alrighty, I want to spend a little bit of time here talking about this next assignment. So, rather than teach you something new, I want to give you some ideas for this one assignment because it all has to do is with creating some random numbers, using some looping, and really that's all there is to it. Um, so let me first talk about what you're going to be doing on the assignment, and then try to give you some hints. And if anything, maybe reveal a little bit on looping, how you can loop, what you need for a while loop and a for loop, and such. I will also say that my son is on in the living room, in the living room, so that's the room over here where I'm at. So if you just hear him scream, just don't panic. Okay, he's okay. He's just watching TV. He gets excited. He might actually come over here and ask me for something. At which point I'll pause the video. So enough here with the introduction. In this assignment, what I want you to do is I want you to ask the user for a number. So I'm going to write a comment here. Ask the user for a number. Just think of it as their lucky number. You are going to put a restriction here, which is obviously not quite right because you wouldn't put a restriction on the number here. But let's just say that it has to be a number between 1 through 100. And that's only so that we can just kind of simplify the application here, and so that it doesn't get too complex. So let's just say that it's always going to be a lucky number between 1 and 100. And the user is going to enter that value. Now, at this point, you know how to ask the user for something. You use the input function. So I'll just write another comment here where in this line 5, you would use the input function to store what the user enters, which would be the lucky number, in a variable. So again, you've done this. I don't feel like I need to explain how to do this. I feel like you should be good. Now, because the user is going to enter a numeric value, a number, instead of like a phrase or a word, you should make that number into an integer, and we use the int function. So also use, and I'll just write it actually here, use the input and the int function to store the lucky number in a variable. So again, I think like you should feel comfortable with this step. It's actually pretty straightforward. So that's on line 5. Now, what your program should do then is it should try to figure out what number the user entered. So your application, your program, try and guess the lucky number. And it's actually not so much more different than the guess my number. If you recall that tutorial video, I can actually open it up so you can see what that looks like. My guess number. So it's not a whole lot different than this. When I went over this, the difference here was that the computer generated a random number, and then you had to guess what the computer generated. And this is actually going to be backwards. You're going to enter a number, and the computer has to guess what number you entered. Now, when we say guess, we actually mean that the computer should spit out some random number and see if that's the correct number. And so you're going to have the application in this case, which I use computer and application kind of in the same sense. The application should keep guessing and guessing and guessing, and the way we keep doing things is we use loops. So we would write a loop here. So use a loop, and I can actually tell you what to use, and you would use a while loop, because a for loop, usually we use for loops when we know exactly how many times we want to loop, which means how many times we want to repeat a line of code. And in this case, we don't know how many times it's going to take the computer, how many guesses it will take the computer to figure out what the right number is. So you're going to use a while loop. I'm going to leave it to you to try to figure out what the Boolean expression is. So the way we would implement the while loop is we would say while, and then in parentheses we'd write what we call a Boolean expression, which means that it's a comparison. Is this equal to that, or is this less than that, or is it not equal? So that's what goes in parentheses, and this is the part where you need to think about, okay, well, what condition must be true? And while that condition is true, we needed the computer, in this case, our application here, to generate random numbers. Between 1 and 100, because that's what the user is going to enter. They're going to enter a random number between 1 and 100. So while this condition is true, generate a random number between 1 and 100 and check to see if that is equal to. So we're going to have to store that in a variable. And so right here on line 10, that actually I'll keep it here on line 9, generate a random number between 1 and 100 and store in a variable. If you don't recall how to generate a random number, we use this function random dot rand int, and then in parentheses we write here what numbers, the random number, it has to be between what and what value. So in this case, it would be 1 and 100. And basically, we want to keep generating random numbers until the computer has guessed the number that the user entered. So you're going to compare the variable up here on line 5 that is basically storing the value that the user entered. You're going to compare it with the random number you keep generating in the while loop. And until they're the same, so until that is a true statement, we're going to keep looping and looping and looping and looping. And then finally, it will guess the right value. And what I want you to do then is to print, and this would happen outside of the loop, or I guess I should say display, how many guesses it took the application to guess the user's lucky number. That's what I want. Now, a few things to understand here is that we're going to let the computer say the user enters 5. 5 is the lucky number, and the first number that the computer generates is 50. So that is, so it hasn't guessed, and then it guesses again and it gets 90, and then it guesses again and it gets 83, and then eventually it might get 50 again. Or although it has already guessed that value, we're still going to count it, okay? Because trying to keep track of what numbers it has guessed and like rule those out would require a lot more work. And if you want to try that, by all means, give it a try. But this is going to be a simple implementation, which means that it's okay if the computer guesses the same number more than once. That's okay. Because if we're trying to keep track of the numbers that the computer has guessed, it requires a little more work. It's doable, but it does require a little more work. And so you do have to display at the very end how many times how many tries it took the computer to guess the number that was entered by the user. I guess one more thing I should note is that you should probably make a variable before your while loop. You should make a variable where you're keeping track of how many tries it has taken. And so you would increment that variable by 1 every time that the application generates a new random number. And so I'll write here a comment where I can say that increase number of tries, and you can call the variable that num tries by 1, which means that after you guess, increase num tries by 1. Obviously, you need to initialize num tries to 0 because um, we shouldn't initialize it to anything other than that. So initialize num tries to 0. And after you do the application guesses for the very first time, and it does so by generating a random number, then we increase num tries by 1. That's our first try, our first guess. And you can keep looping. I'm thinking right now maybe number of guesses might be a little more appropriate, but it doesn't really matter what you call the variable. It just needs to be something that kind of pertains to what you're doing here. Okay. Let's see. I think as far as the problem here, what I want you to do, it's all encompassed here. Now let me spend a little bit of time reminding you how while loop works. Now there's the kiddo. Give me a minute. Okay, okay. I'm trying to pause this thing. All right, I'll be right back. Okay, I wasn't able to find the pause button, but he just wanted me to keep playing the video he's watching. Okay. Let me remind you what a while loop, how it works, what you need to get it to work. So this is what you need to do in this short application. I just want to remind you how while loops operate. The first thing you do when you have a while loop is you always need to initialize a variable that's kind of keeping count of the looping, or that is going to be used, basically a variable that's going to be used here in the Boolean expression. So, for example, if I made a variable called rand, and it was just a number 9, and I made another variable called lucky number, and it was 10. Then while rand does not equal lucky number, then we want to do something. So while that is not true, meaning rand is not equal to lucky number, and they're not to begin with, which is a good thing, because if they were equal, then we would never quite ever do anything inside of the loop. But while rand does not equal lucky number, the exclamation mark means not equal, then what do we want to do? We want to do something. And in this, just a quick example, I'm just going to say increase rand by 1. And we do that by saying rand equals rand plus 1. And so if I start rand at a different number, like 4, then is 4 not equal to 10? The answer is yes. 4 does not equal 10. So because this is true, we're going to say rand is what it used to be, 4 plus 1. So now it's 5. And we're going to loop back to line 7. And is 5 not equal to 10? The answer is yes. So now rand is going to be 5 plus 1, which is 6. And what you notice is that you're going to keep looping until rand is equal to 10. And since we're increasing rand by 1, that means that we're going to have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then when rand is 10, we stop. And I'll just, at the very end here, print what rand is. I'll also print rand in here. And I'll just say something like random equals, and then I'll terminate my string and put up, and then I'll say final value of random. I want you to understand that what I'm doing here it's not necessarily telling you how to work out the actual problem, but it's reminding you how loops work. The previous instructions are meant to help you with that, with those comments. So if I run this, notice that random starts off, it prints 5,
and there's a reason why this is not printing, it's not starting off at 4. If I take this print statement and I paste it so that it happens before I increase rand by 1. So rand is 4, 4 does not equal 10, print 4, increase rand to 5, do it again. So now this actually is a little bit more symbolic of what's happening. Random is 4, then it's 5, 6, then it's 9, and then it's going to be, when it prints 9, you're going to increase it to 10. You loop back to line 7, 10. Is it not equal to 10? And that is a false statement. 10 does equal 10. So you don't do lines and 10 anymore, 9 and 10 anymore. You stop and you finally print on line 12. The final value of random is 10. Notice that if I increase this to 50, it would loop all the way until rand is equal to 50. So a reminder of how loops work. The expression here tells you when to keep looping. You repeat these lines of code so long as this is a true statement. You need to initialize the variable rand before the while loop. You also, in this case, need to initialize the variable lucky number before line 7 here when you use it. You need to update random right here on line 10. And finally you print at the end. This is actually very much like what you're supposed to be doing, but this needs to be different. You can't hard code it to 50. You cannot hard code this to a number 4. You cannot just say that rand is equal to itself plus 1. So this needs to be different. And no need for this print statement. The only thing that's missing here is where you're keeping count of how many guesses. But the rest is very much like what you're supposed to implement in this assignment. So I hope this helps. Let me know if you need any help or you have any questions.